3 years ago, I looked at GrapheneOS, a modified version of Android that prioritizes user control, privacy, and security, while still actually being usable for your average user, unlike lots of other OSs that try to do those things. When I did that, I oohed and ahed at the improvements I thought it brought.
This phone tracks you less, has better battery life,
Complained at the actual problems I had using it,
and I've lost so many features.
and had lots of people misinterpret those minor or even significant problems as reasons that I hate GrapheneOS and would never use it, despite the fact that I do use it and really like it. But 3 years later, I'm back and I'm even more bullish on it. It's good, which it already was, but it also gets in my way less. Partly because of mentality changes of my own, and partly because of actual changes to the OS. It's so good that I could probably recommend it to basically every Android user that doesn't rely on Google Pay contactless payments. And that's good because there are, I don't know if you'd even call them rumors, we don't know all of the details yet, but GrapheneOS is working with a hardware partner to potentially get actual shipped with graphene phones eventually. And that sounds amazing, but I have a few concerns about how the OS team itself and the community present the project to average people, which might affect how they see it negatively. But I'll get to that later. Let's start now with why you might want to use it. And to do that, we have to understand why people might not want the version of Android that came with their phone, since they wouldn't be looking for alternatives if they were happy with what they already had. And probably the most universal one, which kind of applied to iPhones too, but it's mainly an Android thing, especially a Samsung thing, is the amount of bloat that Android can come with. And probably the easiest example is Samsung deciding to put the Microsoft version, the Google version, and the Samsung version of all the different kinds of apps on Samsung phones, along with a bunch of like Facebook-related telemetry stuff in the background. But I'd argue the same even applies to relatively trivial things like Google pre-installing YouTube Music on Pixels. If you want one of these apps, you can just install it. Like, there is no benefit to them coming pre-installed. And the new star of Android bloat is AI stuff. From the moment you boot up your phone, you'll be reminded of Gemini this, Magic Eraser that, and proofread writing generation thing these. It's something that many people find useful, many people don't, and therefore it should just be something you can install instead of something built into the phone everywhere, affecting its battery life and your privacy and things like that. Oh, and obviously, make sure you're signed in to a Samsung and Google account, because not being signed in is a security problem, you know? Like, it's just all very annoying to have your phone tell you what the right way to use it is. And you know what GrapheneOS is going to force on you? A stock open source like dialer, messaging, and contacts app, and that's basically it. It completely does not care what apps or services you might want to use, since it makes absolutely no money from advertising to you or collecting your data in any way. It doesn't have those weird, perverse incentives that modern OSs have, where like, yeah, you're our customer in the sense that you bought our expensive phone hardware, but you're not a real Samsung customer unless you have Galaxy Buds. So we're actually going to remove AOSP, like stock open source features that work with all their phones, and make them just work with the Samsung ones because you got a Samsung phone. And you're not a real Google customer unless you're also subscribed to YouTube Music, so we're just going to put that there in the app drawer for you because you should pick that one. That's not nice. I don't appreciate it. So although it's maybe slightly less friendly that you're just dropped into an empty like Android install and there's basically nothing there, I would argue that that is better because everything you install from that point will be your choice instead of what the company wants you to use, which you might not want to use. Not needing to worry about OS level advertising, and yes, pop-ups for your own services still counts as advertising, also means not needing to worry about OS level data collection. And that's great, since although I understand that phone companies promise to use our data to improve their apps and services, it seems like they use it more as an excuse to ignore user feedback. Like, they can collect some data, misinterpret that data however they feel in order to justify what they want to do something, and then when we complain about it, they can just go, well, the graph says you're wrong, we made it better. So I don't think it helps very much anyway. And that's not even getting into the actual nefarious uses of that data instead of just the misuse compared to what they claimed it was for. For better or worse, GrapheneOS mainly sticks to the features in AOSP, the Android open source project, with the only significant additions being regarding privacy and security features, like the absolutely wonderful ability to control an app's access to your internet and physical sensors like gyroscope and accelerometer, which these kind of things make it so much easier to trust proprietary software that you do have to run, even if, ideally, you'd just be using open source software. Like, super secret zero-day exploits in the actual Android permission system itself aside, having more permissions exposed to the user is just always a good thing, and helps protect against not just intentional data collection, but also accidental app exploits. It's better if you can give all programs as little access as possible while still allowing them to do whatever they need to do for you, and this helps that. Plus, beyond developing features exclusively for GrapheneOS that only GrapheneOS users can benefit from, the GrapheneOS devs actually help contribute to the broader Android security ecosystem as a whole. Maybe less now that Google is kind of taking AOSP more and more closed over time, which is not great. But as an example of a past contribution, on your probably non-GrapheneOS phone, you might have come across storage scopes in your permissions before, which lets an app think that it has access to all of your files, while only actually giving access to a subset that you want to give it access to. Guess who done that? The GrapheneOS devs. And then it got upstreamed, and now all the versions of Android have it. And I think still exclusively to GrapheneOS, you can do the same with context scopes as well. Same goes for allowing per connection, which is to say per individual time that you connect to a network, Wi-Fi MAC address randomization. Previously, this was a thing in AOSP, but just for each Wi-Fi network individually, or you could directly just give your phone's actual MAC address. But even though that AOSP method helps make sure that your device can't be identified between Wi-Fi networks, so they can't all collude to track your device's movements together, it does mean that any individual Wi-Fi network could still track the comings and goings of your one device, whereas implementing things so your MAC address changes every single time you connect kind of removes that possibility. And now that's in other versions of Android too. With the basics now covered, I've just got one more thing to go over before I can get to the usability aspects of GrapheneOS, and that's the kind of image that operating systems like this have. I mean, I don't agree with this, please don't shoot the messenger, but I know people in real life who see even Apple's advertising, focusing on privacy and security, as weird and conspiratorial, even if they then go ahead and use an iPhone and benefit from all of the privacy and security benefits, at least relative to lots of versions of Android. So it's probably not that hard to imagine that those feelings can get heightened somewhat when it's coming from a much smaller, I don't think I would call it underground, but relatively underground project talking about super hardened privacy and security. Do you know how dodgy and conspiratorial it honestly makes you sound to lots of average people when you say, hey man, we're being spied on, you gotta switch to this privacy hardened custom OS and that focuses on protecting you from attacks that are generally only used by law enforcement or nation state level attacks on high profile targets? Whether you'd say that that's a good or bad advertisement for GrapheneOS, or whether it's even representative of what the project is and is trying to be, I would argue that is the vibe that a lot of people get from it. And that's unfortunate, since as much as it does also focus on, very high security, very fancy things, it also just helps your average person have less data collected about them and be more secure in general, normal ways. I think this might appeal to more technology-focused people who would like to know absolutely what's running on their phone and how everything's working and so on. But to the average phone user, it just sounds like you've gone a little bit crazy. And that is a shame, given that GrapheneOS has been hinting about the fact that at some point they're gonna have a hardware release. They're working with an OEM. In theory, that means at some point you'll be able to buy a brand new phone with GrapheneOS on it. And I don't mean those eBay listings that charge crazy amounts to install GrapheneOS on a Pixel. And that sounds like a great way for the project to earn some cash from the loyal GrapheneOS users who would now get to support GrapheneOS instead of buying Google Pixels and then using GrapheneOS for free. However, I don't think it's gonna make it into the mainstream, or even just the early adopter kind of mainstream, if the marketing stays the same for GrapheneOS. If the GrapheneOS developers don't want it to go mainstream, or if they disagree with me and say, no, we actually know for a fact that most of the mainstream would actually be fine with the kind of messaging around GrapheneOS, so we're going to keep doing that because that's what we really like, I would be willing to concede that they are probably smarter than me and have more resources and so on. But I think at least that the basic argument of these companies put a lot of rubbish on your phone, it hurts your battery life and privacy, we give you control back over your phone, is a much more approachable argument than we are super serious about privacy and security. Which is a shame, because the last one also sounds like a positive to me. Again, if you think I'm wrong with this, I would really appreciate you letting me know why. But as far as I'm concerned, basically everyone that I have talked to who isn't already into trying to harden their computer systems or get more control over them or whatever, just see it as weird that you would care. And so that is where this argument is coming from. But tell me why I'm wrong, because it would give me more hope if I was wrong. Anyway, with all that covered, now it's usability time. And I think a good way to handle talking about the pros and cons of a piece of software is to use the format of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're gonna go in reverse order, since even though there's not much, what's ugly is ugly. And I mean that extremely literally. Look at this clock app. I'll add some screen capture after the fact, but look at it. And then look at the SMS app. And then look at the built-in phone app, and so on. GrapheneOS has developed a few apps of their own, like the camera app, which we'll get to later, and all of those look fine. But a few of the apps that come with GrapheneOS are the old AOSP versions that Google stopped maintaining in favor of their own proprietary versions of them a long, long time ago. And that means partly that they're missing some modern features, but partly that they look very old. And I know it's shallow, you shouldn't care about how things look as long as they work fine, but lots of people, including me, just not for the clock app because I very rarely open it, do care about how things look. And I'm concerned that your average person is going to see something like that clock app or any of the other pre-installed apps that look like that and go, wow, this is caveman technology, it feels like I've gone back 10 years, I don't want this. If you want some recommendations for replacements for these stock apps, I would strongly suggest the Fossify suite of apps. They have all of them, all of the very basic apps that you might need. They're actually forked from some older ones that got bought out. It's complicated. They're not going to win any design awards, but they look perfectly fine, modern enough, and work quite well. And I think they all don't have internet access permission, which for anything other than GrapheneOS would be a relevant, privacy reassurance. So that's nice. The keyboard that ships with GrapheneOS is in the same boat as those other AOSP apps for the most part. It does have autocorrect, which I don't think all AOSP variants do. Whatever, but the autocorrect is not great. There's no swipe typing, there's no modern features, like if you want to send GIFs using a keyboard or whatever, or have the nice gesture where you can swipe back on the delete key and it will delete multiple words at once really quickly. Any kind of modern features, the AOSP keyboard, which ships with GrapheneOS, won't have those. But unlike 3 years ago, I come bearing good news, which comes in the form of the Futo keyboard. It's modern, doesn't have internet access, it's basically indistinguishable from Gboard at a surface level, except it's more customizable, and the source code is available if you want to modify it yourself. The only real thing that I consistently see people ask for that Futo keyboard doesn't have and Gboard does have is GIF support, which can't really happen right now because it doesn't have internet permission like the Fossify apps. However, maybe one day there'll be a plugin system and that would be cool, and then people can add whatever. But for me, it supports all of the modern keyboard features, including offline dictation, which is really nice. And to address the feature hole that not having GIF support creates, it has text styles, which I'm not really sure what encouraged one of the developers to spend time on it, but it's also really fun, and everyone I've showed them to has been delighted by them, especially those who already have Futo keyboard on their phone and had no idea about it, because they don't tell you about it, but you can make the dramatic text memes built into your phone. Besides that, I suppose it's unfortunate that the Futo keyboard's offline dictation doesn't happen live while you're speaking, which, as someone who's used Whisper models myself before and programmed with them, I wouldn't expect to be very difficult to implement. However, here's me with that supposed technical skill not implementing it, so it can't be that easy. Either way, that's probably the biggest thing they could do to kind of make it feel more up to par with Gboard, but It's pretty close. It's actually so good that I paid the optional. You can use it forever without paying it, so don't worry. You can just try it, and it's still got the source code available and stuff. But I paid the optional license fee because this is exactly the kind of software I want to see. Now it's time to talk about the bad, which is, this section's mainly titled that way to help fit the format. There's actually not very much. And we're actually going to start with some formally bad stuff, beginning with the GrapheneOS camera app. 3 years ago, I would have gone so far as to say the GrapheneOS camera app was flat out bad. It was just extremely basic and didn't support almost any of the post-processing that makes a pixel camera. And it still doesn't support everything, but it supports more stuff and supports night sight now and QR code scanning. And they claim that in a year or so, whenever this actually comes, it should be able to support the full proper suite of pixel processing features thanks to camera APIs in Android improving, and at that point there would be no photo quality difference between it and any other app. Honestly, I think that already most people could probably use it fine, and as a bonus it looks fairly reasonable. Yeah, it does actually look kind of like a knockoff pixel camera app, but I think if you weren't thinking about it that way, it wouldn't look like a knockoff. It would just look like a fine camera app, and it has all the kind of adjustments realistically you'll need. But I still tend to prefer Open Camera, which is maybe less slick looking, but it offers way more customization and actually offers more photo processing support. I can more specifically say what kind of stock processing I want it to use. And given how solid and full-featured Open Camera is, I kind of question why the GrapheneOS developers felt the need to develop their own from scratch, which is evidently taking a while and I still don't think is up to the level of the Open Camera, when they could have just either asked permission to maybe bring it into the GrapheneOS, what's it called? An organization on GitHub, or at the very least just forked it and started building on it from there and making it look nicer. One thing that's universal regardless of the camera app you're using, and yes, that includes the ones built into messengers and things like that, is that the full camera system should actually work. Previously, I had issues where I just couldn't use my wide-angle camera and there was basically no processing in third-party apps and things like that. And it turns out that part of that was because I didn't have Pixel camera services installed, which now comes installed by default, or at least maybe came with another app I installed. I'm not 100% sure, but I didn't install it this time and now it's on my phone, so in some way I have it and I didn't install it. And that's great because that is the actual part that is necessary for other apps to communicate with all of the special pixel camera processing and the multiple camera switching when you zoom in and stuff like that. But even when I had that installed, when the first time I tried GrapheneOS quite a while ago, lots of apps were just very flaky with it. Some apps would just still never support processing or zooming to change between cameras, and others would work sometimes and then stop working and so on. One thing that'll always be the case, and is always quite funny about giving users more control over their software, is that it means more users are more likely to mess things up. Something I did by accident was actually make it so all of my pictures were taken at a 90-degree offset or angle relative to my actual phone's orientation, and it turns out that was because when I disabled gyroscope access for all of my apps by default, I didn't take into account that camera apps would need to know that, since I thought they could just go based off the rotation of the phone, which they do still get to see, but they don't. So if you experience that issue, that might be why. Staying in the same general area, the photo and video editing experience on GrapheneOS is pretty meh unless you want to rely on Google Photos. You are given the option of installing Google's proprietary screenshot markup editor, which is nice if you want that. But besides that, your options outside of Google Photos are basically Open Video Editor for videos and the Fossify Gallery Editor for pictures, both of which are fine, especially given the Open Video Editor no longer exports 0-byte files half the time like it did on my old phone, but they're both relatively lackluster in visuals and features. That said, this isn't particularly a GrapheneOS thing, it's just an open source software thing, so there's tons of room to improve. There's the option to use the Google proprietary stuff if you want to, and it's all free, community-done work, so you can't really complain, and I've not actually found something I can't do in them that I've wanted to do yet. It's just more awkward, and you won't have any fancy AI features until somebody decides to make that themselves. Hardware support is either something that you could consider amazing or terrible, depending on your perspective. Like, it's really unfortunate that only Google Pixels are supported, since that stops lots of people from using what is a great OS. However, for an operating system focused so much on privacy and security, their argument is that Pixels are the best Android phones when it comes to hardware security, so they're just going to support the Pixels as well as possible until they have their own hardware to support better. It seems like Pixels will always get at least as much support as they would from Google, and that doesn't just mean the length for which they get security updates, that includes the actual hardware on them. All of the drivers for everything works perfectly, with the one exception I know of being the satellite communication features that they added in Pixel 9s, and I imagine part of that is because it's kind of unique special hardware that's not in every phone, but also part of it is because it's actually this external service, where how would you pay for it? Like once the free period ends, because there's a free period when you buy the phone, and then once you have to pay for it afterwards, how do you do that? From GrapheneOS, like that's not really a problem that they can solve reasonably. Combined with the fact that not many people use it, including like me, even on the stock OS, it's probably not much of a loss, but it's kind of a shame. And besides that, everything is just fully supported. And maybe you'd class this as still part of the bad section, but it kind of depends how you choose to interpret it. But whatever, it's time for the Google Services section. GrapheneOS is not, as you might think, strictly a de-Googled OS. Like, it can be if you want it to be, but they've also put a lot of time, a lot of development effort, and they put it right up in your face in the app installer that you can just install the Play services, just in a slightly cooler way, which I'll get to in a sec. Because the point of the OS is not, sticking it to Google. It's the fact that you get more privacy, security, and control over your phone while still getting the positive aspects of the Android experience. And for lots of people, the Google experience is a positive one, or at the very least, it's a necessary component to allow their positive experiences to work. And some people might draw a hard line and say, well, if you're using Google services, what's even the point? But somebody else could come along and say, well, if you're using proprietary apps at all, what's even the point? And then the next person could say, well, if you're using a proprietary bootloader and baseband firmware and that kind of thing, what's even the point? There isn't a strict line of what's okay. It's just up to you to decide what you want, which I think is a really healthy way of thinking about things, since it means more people can get closer to a better experience without having to completely just give up on it because, well, Google stuff doesn't work, so I just can't do it. If you choose to install Play services, most apps that rely on it will work completely fine. The only big thing that doesn't work is the Play Attestation API, which is a dubiously useful security feature that lets apps be sure that you're running a Google-sanctioned and unmodified version of Android, and obviously Google isn't sanctioning GrapheneOS. So that means things like some banking apps, not most though, seemingly, which is nice, and the Google Pay, like contactless card payment stuff, will not work. But most regular apps that rely on Play services will be fine, and if you choose to install Play services, you'll actually be installing them still in a slightly safer and more controlled way than on a normal phone, since they're installed like any other app, instead of having system-level permissions where they don't need to care about the Android permission system and it can just access everything on your phone. Since it's a user-level app, you can control all of the permissions for it. So if you just need Google Play services to make your bank app work, you can say, well, Google doesn't need access to my gyroscope data or my notifications or fitness activity or Bluetooth and anything else like that. You get to go through and pick exactly what it has access to, so it's still an improvement over running any other regular Googled OS. You can even actually keep your main user profile completely free of Google services and then install Google services in a second profile that is allowed to run in the background, and therefore you can install all your Google apps in there and you can still get notifications, but it's it's a cleaner mental model since you've got all your proprietary and open stuff separate, and it means that the Play services can't look at what you've got installed in your open profile, which you might want. As for whether you'll even need Play services, I don't. There are a few different ways that apps can work without them. The first and worst example is apps that will not work. If you try and set up a Wear OS smartwatch without Play services, you're getting nowhere, and it probably won't actually give you useful error messages, saying it's because of Google services. It will just be, things are broken, and lots of other apps will just not launch. You'll press on them, it'll get to the splash screen, and then they'll close again. There are also a few others where They will regularly open and will give you a useful error message saying that Play Services is required. However, I've noticed that there are a few of these apps that give a warning message and say, this will not work without Play Services. And then you press OK. And then you just keep using the app, which is quite nice. But yeah, so some apps just don't work. The next category is apps that kind of work. Like some functionality fails without Google services, but you might be able to get by with it. An example that I personally have is Manchester's B Network app, which gives you access to the public transport stuff and journey planning and all that. And I don't actually use it for journey planning. I just need it for tickets, because there are some tickets you can only buy digitally. And for me, the rest of the UI of that app renders completely fine, but the Google-powered maps give a warning about these won't work without Play Services, and that's fine for me. So I really appreciate that if an app developer is going to use Play Services, you can still use the rest of the app that doesn't need them without them. I think that is a much better way of developing things, and I appreciate that. But probably the more common form of this is actually that everything within the app will work perfectly, but notifications won't work, because it's very inefficient for your phone, like for every app on your phone, to be connected to that app servers all the time, waiting for notifications. So instead, that app says, app servers, could you send this to Google's notification servers? And then the Play services just have one connection to Google, and then you get all of your notifications through Google, which is better for battery life, worse because you're relying on Google. Some apps allow you to set up alternative notification servers. I haven't done this because none of mine do that. Some of them just are able to connect to the actual like regular app servers for notifications. So like Signal and WhatsApp do that kind of thing. Though like they don't tell you about this. This isn't like a toggle in settings. You just have to install them without Play services in the first place. And then some, like your bank app probably, will just only send notifications through Google, and without Play services, you're just not going to have notifications. And it's up to you whether that's fine or not. And then finally, and bestly, some apps do not rely on Play services at all. You can use them completely fine. They won't even bother to check if you have Play services, and this is the best kind of app. Thumbs up to these developers. There are a few other Google-specific services that you can choose to use if you want. Or not even services, but like the GrapheneOS camera app and the Pixel camera app. Like the Pixel camera app does do a few special things, and if you want, you can do offline transcription using the Google keyboard and using the Google recorder, and I think you can even use the like special features like call screening that the Google Dialer app has. It's just your choice about whether you want to use Google's proprietary stuff and give it the necessary permissions or not. Call screening is something that I've always been interested in from like a technological standpoint, because it sounds really cool, but it seems like most of the people who swear by it and they love it are from North America, and maybe spam is a bigger issue there, but I could count on one hand the number of spam calls and texts I get a year combined, so it would be like cool to have, but I'm not willing to set up Google stuff in order to have it. But now for my favorite section, the good. Starting with actually something that the GrapheneOS devs probably didn't even think much about. Like it's not actually a big feature of GrapheneOS, but the fact that you can access device diagnostics easily without being signed into a Google account. Maybe you can do this on the stock OS with one of the like phone dialer codes or something like that, but when I first got this phone used and I wanted to check the battery cycles, I went straight to the settings app, and then when I tried to run battery health diagnostics, it told me to sign into a Google account. I was able to actually get around that with a third-party app, like here's a picture from me on the bus trying to figure this out. However, in GrapheneOS, in the system settings, there's just a diagnostics button that gives you all of the diagnostics, no Google account required. If you can actually see them without a Google account on the stock OS, then one, it's unintuitive, it wasn't where I checked, and they clearly lead you to the way that makes you have a Google account, and two, there's a chance actually that if you can see it and you're on a Pixel 6a, you might have a faulty battery, since they specifically added that to the battery menu for the phones with faulty batteries, so maybe look into that. Another thing is the extreme lack of bloat. But we already talked about pre-installed apps, so I'm not going to cover that right now, and instead I'm going to talk about other features that you can remove, like presidential level emergency wireless alerts. I will say I don't know the laws in different places, so there's a chance that your country says, no, you actually can't turn these off, and if so, don't turn them off. But I like that your phone isn't going to stop you from changing settings, and it's up to you to follow the rules wherever you are. And I quite like that I can fully turn off emergency alerts, including presidential level ones, which doesn't really make sense for the UK. Don't have a president, but yeah, I like that it gives you that level of control. And the same goes for phone calls and the fact that you can record them easily. This is another thing where laws will vary wildly. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding within the UK is that, unlike in the US, we don't really care about like whether it's a 1 or 2 party consent thing. It's more about how you use the recording. Like, you can record whatever for personal use, but then if you share it, it's a problem. But whatever. Like, it's my job to understand those rules, and my phone app just gives me a record button, and I can record a call if I would like to. Except, I actually went to go and show this cool fancy GrapheneOS feature to someone I know in real life who also has a Pixel, only for them to respond that, oh yeah, I also got that feature recently. That's kind of cool. Apparently Google has just added it to the regular phone app now, which is still good, even if it's just so they can add AI transcription stuff to it. A win is a win. For a good feature that didn't used to be a thing on GrapheneOS, and now it is, easy eSIM setups. I don't use eSIMs, but eventually, just based on how phones are being made now, at some point I'm going to have to. And so it's nice that now using an eSIM doesn't require you to install the whole Google Play Services stuff. I think it does still install some small proprietary binary, but that's not part of the main Google stuff. You could always use an eSIM by just installing Google services or setting it up in your main OS and then installing GrapheneOS, and it would stay installed because the eSIM is like a weird separate thing that's not stored in your main storage. Everything to do with SIM cards is weird, even digital ones. But now you can go through the full eSIM setup process without any Google stuff installed, which is nice. A similar thing where there's kind of some privacy harming aspect, but it's still better than before, is location tracking. Now, the most accurate and best way in theory to get your location is just through raw GPS, and nobody else has to be involved in that, and your phone doesn't even communicate back to the satellite, so it's completely private. Except there are situations where you don't get good enough GPS signal, be that if you're in a train or if you're in a relatively dense city and buildings blocking it and stuff like that. And if you had to sacrifice reasonable location tracking and the ability to use a Maps app all the time, that would probably be an unreasonable thing for many people. So GrapheneOS supports proxying like network-based location tracking requests, or sending them to the Apple servers, which is really cool, and like very much has helped me. I was sticking to just raw GPS at the start, but there were quite a lot of times where I just couldn't get a lock. Like I left it for a few minutes and I just couldn't get location access. But then turning on Wi-Fi based stuff, yeah, it's a shame that I can't rely purely on GPS, but it's super fast now. Next, I want to talk about app installations, where originally I wasn't sure where to put this because it's not really good or bad. It's just the Android way of doing things. Like, it's perfectly normal. You can install the Play Store if you want, but you can also use F-Droid, which is an alternate app store that is full of only free and open source apps. You could use Obtainium, which lets you also get F-Droid apps, but also get apps straight from their Git repos from the original developer. Or there's the Aurora Store, which is an alternative front end for the Play Store, except you might get your Google account banned, and then there are anonymous accounts, but then which is probably what most people use. But then you're still using the Google Play Store, and it's kind of a shame. And ideally, you would get away from that. I mainly use Obtainium and get things directly from the app developers, and even for F-Droid, I just use Obtainium because it also supports F-Droid stuff, so it's just all one app. So although these are not the way that normal people would install Android apps, they're not actually special to GrapheneOS. It's just if you want more open source things or don't want to rely on the Play Store, you can do them on any version of Android. So I wasn't really sure whether to put it in good or bad, since it's just the Android way of doing things. However, now it definitely needs to go into the good section, because GrapheneOS is almost certainly not going to implement Google's new developer ID check system, which is going to involve developers having to give Google, pay Google money and show them their government ID, or Google will block their apps from being sideloaded onto other people's phones, even when distributed outside of the Play Store. That is a completely ridiculous idea, and, well, GrapheneOS won't do that to you. Something GrapheneOS will do for you, though, is show you the logs for apps, which is so useful. I'm pretty sure you could do this through ADB in the past, or you can like dump a zip file of the system logs. I'm not sure exactly how you would get the app logs. It's just really nice. Just in the app settings, you can press View App Logs, and it shows that. So if you're having an app that's crashing or having issues, you can see if the developer put useful things that might help you diagnose it. I really like features like this because they further the idea that your phone is yours and it's not magic, and GrapheneOS knows that it's not magic. It's just a good OS that will give you access to troubleshoot things when you need it and give you the freedom to do what you want, while also giving you all of the benefits of the like nice curated Android experience if you want that. It's just a very enjoyable experience using your phone. And like I said before, they stick mainly to regular AOSP features, so there's not actually tons and tons to talk about with GrapheneOS, except for talking about things that they don't do, which feels like a weird advertisement for an OS. Like, look at all these things it doesn't do, as opposed to like, here's all these shiny new features. But I just enjoy it a lot, and so I thought I should share it. Though I realize now that I've said that, there is one really cool thing that GrapheneOS does that basically no other custom ROM does, to my knowledge. And that's the fact that they've got a web USB based installer. And a command line one, so you can install stuff the manual way if you would like, or if you're a Firefox user, because WebUSB isn't supported on anything other than Chromium, which isn't an issue for the GrapheneOS devs, since when they had the choice of making their own hardened browser, they used Chromium as a base anyway, which has valid reasons, but I'm just going to keep using Firefox, whatever. But given most people do use a Chromium-based browser, it's really cool that there is no installing all the weird Android drivers and stuff like that on your computer and then having to download images and put them into command line tools. You go to a website, you plug your phone in, you press install, and it does it all through the web browser. And because of that, it actually even works from another Android phone. That's really impressive, and it shows that they are putting attention, despite how the clock and calculator apps look, into like a polished user experience for this. And that's really cool. So that's GrapheneOS. I think as a person, I have grown in the last few years and become more like fundamentally willing and like caring about making sure that I'm not locked into vendor-specific solutions and closed-source apps and that kind of thing. So making the transition to GrapheneOS is much simpler for me, and like trying to gain the benefits of like privacy and less data collection. I already experienced some of those benefits even on a stock Android OS. But I think even for people who don't care at all about open software, aren't hardcore about privacy and security, will still benefit from the control aspect of it. And again, any step towards being better and more privacy and more security is a win. Even if that's not what you're aiming for, it's the kind of thing that software should just grant you. And it's not like it's an amazing thing that GrapheneOS doesn't do it. It's a bad thing that these stock OS are harming your experience in that way. So like GrapheneOS restores sanity to your phone. The exact reason that any individual is going to use it will be different from the next, but I'm really looking forward to maybe hearing some of your feedback about whether GrapheneOS seems right for you or your experience using it, and to how GrapheneOS goes on into the future with potential hardware partners.
And quick little editor's note, if you completely disagree with everything I said and you would like to hear the opinions of someone else, a certain much larger tech creator will make a video about this in a few days, probably. So you can go and watch that instead.
Plus, although this only supports pixels, if you're on a different phone, maybe you could see if a different alternative ROM, like the main one, LineageOS, is not the same as GrapheneOS, and the GrapheneOS developers would be very happy to tell you that, but I would argue it's probably still better to use than whatever came on your phone. So maybe you could consider some other open alternative Android ROM, if you thought GrapheneOS was cool but you don't have the hardware for it. But that's all I've got for today, so hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully the Patreon members especially enjoyed. I would completely understand if you all cancelled your plans for, like, I upload videos very rarely now. But I really do appreciate that you're still here, and I owe you all a big shout out. So thank you so much to Innerbox, Russell Willis, Fluffy Meowl, Novus4K, PT1997, and a new member who I messaged and I was like, are you definitely sure? Do you know that I don't upload videos very often anymore? And they were like, yeah, apparently they very much enjoyed my Wyvern video and joined from that. Rob on Earth. So thank you very much to all of you. Hopefully you all enjoyed, and I will see you when I see you. Who knows when that will be. Bye.